GreenKeeper Pre-Beta Checks CPU, GPU bounding.
So this is the screenshot or the file for our benchmark. I closed it down previously. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a look at these areas. So we'll start at hole 5 and we'll just see if we can see any reason as to why we'd be getting this low frame rate. So let's go to hole 5T and we'll zoom to view. And let's turn our VS Pro on. Now there is quite a lot going on there. So I'll go back to the tools menu just so we get a good full view of it. Now we could run the flyover down here again, but what I'm going to do at this point is I've got Windows Game Bar, which you get Win and G, and then you've got this performance area. But you could use any sort of FPS monitor. And you can see here we're getting an frames per second of 36. And you'll have to take this figure of CPU usage a little bit, disregard it a little bit because it's being used by this Loom recorder. What I'll do is if I pause this, yeah, so I just looked and the CPU usage, you might have caught it, or you might not have done, it's about 10%. So we're GPU bound here. So when we say about being CPU or GPU bound, it's what is the limiting factor causing our frame rate to be what it is. So there's really 3 types of limit we'll hit. We'll either hit a VSync bound, which is what we want, where the VSync, which we've set to match our monitor refresh rate, in this case 60 Hertz. So we should get 60 frames per second. If we're doing that, we'd have a GPU less than 100%. CPU will always be less than 100%. And we'll have like 59, 60 frames per second. If we are GPU bound, as we are now, our GPU is hitting 100%, but it can't render 60 frames. It can only render 33. And that's the next easiest ones because we know it's probably density of foliage or something in VS Pro or our meshes or our 3DG or something like that. It's basically graphically overloaded. And arguably the more complicated one is if we get CPU bound. So in that case, you'd have less than 60 FPS, but our GPU use wouldn't be maxed out. It'd be like 80, even 80, anything less than like sort of 96, 97, 98%. You're getting into CPU bounding, and that's basically instructions for the GPU to draw all the stuff can't get through quick enough. And that's often caused by, in terms of Unity, your batch counts, there's too many draw calls, or you could have it with like a VS Pro issue where you've got your cell sizes set incorrectly, or you could have animation problems. Anything that the CPU's having to do means it's too slow for the GPU to render the frame, so it's only sending 30 frames per second to draw. Whereas at this moment, the CPU's sending, say, 100 frames for it to draw, and it can't draw them. It can only draw 30. So in this case, because we're GPU bound, I'd be looking at rendering in terms of 3DG or VS Pro in this case. So we can check if it's 3DG simple enough by pressing the Z key. You can see our 3DG disappearing here. And we're not seeing any frame jump, and our GPU is still maxed out. So it's not a 3DG issue. If we open and go back to our base and turn off our VS Pro, you can see we're now rendering at 60 frames a second. Our GPU use has dropped to 42%. And yeah, we're now VSync bound, which is what we want. So it's something in VS Pro is more than likely the cause of our problem. And I'm reliably informed, or possibly informed, having spoken to Brian, that he was going to try for his first step making sure his trees in VS Pro were set up correctly. So we tend to have, excuse me, trees should be instanced rendering as opposed to instance indirect. Grasses should be indirect. It's just the way, although it's somewhat against common convention, instance indirect is generally better throughout most things. In our version of VS Pro and Unity, we found through testing that instance works better when we have shadows on objects. Indirect works better when it's non-shadow casting. So it could be that. It could be even more simple than that. It could be that there's simply too many triangles. Like these trees could be set up so these could be 20,000 triangle trees and there's loads of them, so there's just too much geometry being rendered and so the GPU can't keep up. Things like that. You could have, yeah, that's generally the two things that it would be for GPU. It would be either geometry bound or it could be a rendering issue. I don't think there'll be any areas where I can show CPU bounding. I would have thought, but we can fly down the hole and we can see we're still GPU bound. Whereas if I bring up the thing again, I should imagine with GPU bound throughout, where it's not as bad as hole 3. So if we go to hole 3, see, I'm currently CPU bound. Because my GPU is lower than 100, which shot up to 100 now. So I'm still GPU bound. We've got some higher frame rates on this one, didn't we? Yeah, so I'm still GPU bounding. If I was to pause here, no, even at this point, I'm still GPU bound. I thought it was CPU, but it's not. So yeah, it's purely a CPU bounding issue on this course. I haven't got an example of anywhere where I can get away from it. Yeah, it's just very heavy on GPU use. So at this point, where things aren't sort of working quite how you'd want them, you've sussed out basically that you're GPU bound, and then you go back into Unity and check your triangle counts. Make sure, like I say, you've got your instance and your instanced indirect set up correctly. Yeah, and then all that sort of, hopefully just basic Unity optimization, which is a whole nother sort of subject really beyond a pre-beta check. Just trying to see if I can get the CPU bound because of this Loom recording, but I can't really. Loom does do, because obviously I'm rendering with my GPU to a certain extent with Loom as well. No, I can't really find anywhere CPU bound on this course. So yeah, we're pretty much GPU bound. See here, we might get one here. I think it's just going to mess with the recording though, because it's basically turning it off and on. So yeah, that's how, in the big scheme of things, you can use a monitor like this, use your GPU usage, CPU usage to tell which type of bounding you are, and then from that you would then go into Unity, go back into your scene and have a look in the areas. So like in this one, if I load into the editor, I would go straight into my editor and go to hole 5, check the Unity stats, and you'll probably see that either your try counts will be very low, and you'll say, well, that's strange. My try count's low, but I'm still GPU bound. And that would be a definite indication that you've got things set instanced indirect instead of instanced, because instance indirect hides. Unity stats can't pick that up. So make sure you always double check that anyway. But once you've set it to instance, you might see there that your try count is very, very high, like 30 million, 35 million. And then at that point, you'd be reducing the geometry of your course check your LOD levels on your trees, things like that, and try and get the performance up. But yeah, that's it's a separate topic, actually doing the work to find out how to improve the optimization of your course. But this is how you can use the results of your flyover and a monitor such as this, even Task Manager, I think. You've got the performance section of Task Manager even, which isn't quite as pretty as game thing. But you can see here, you can get your you can see your memory usage, you can see your usage, CPU, you can see it's using a fair bit of it. It's arguably better than Game Bar for this. You can see a bit better on here, your clock speed and things like that. So you can use Task Manager. I think if you go into Resource Monitor, you'll get an even clearer indication across all your cores about what's going on. So you can see my when we say about getting CPU banned, you might see a total CPU usage is quite low. You can see core 1 is getting pushed very hard, whereas I've got other cores that aren't being pushed very hard, and that's why it's slightly CPU bounding is a lot more sort of complicated. So when you're looking at CPU usage, Resource Monitor can be quite handy, but in general you can just use Task Manager, Windows Game Bar, Reaver Tuner, Afterburner. But again, you can see we're maxing out, and my GPU's actually getting fairly hot as well. But it's cooling okay. 86 isn't the end of the world. So yeah, that's using the flyover in order to try and work out where the bounding is on your course, and then obviously it's then the job to fix it. And that is the joys and the full process of pre-beta testing a course.